Hello, lovelies. Let me take you back to 2008, when yes, me, that's my name right there, I worked on a supplement or two for Wizards of the Coast. And let me pull back the curtain on what it was like doing some work for Wizards of the Coast back then. So this was released for 3.5 edition, based on the D&D online game of the time. It's a whole bunch of weird choices and things involved in D&D online and this release and 4th edition, because, you know, this came out in February 2008. 4th edition D&D came out on June 6th, 2008. So this was like the worst time to release something like this. It was also quite a bit after D&D Online had come out, I think. Let me just double check that for you. Okay, yeah, D&D Online was February 2006, so 2 years after the launch. Far too long after all the hype. And D&D Online itself was an odd duck, choosing Eberron as the setting, though they seemed to mostly license that for computer games and so on. At the time, that was weird. That's not where most people's attention was, much as I like Eberron. It does seem like a very peculiar thing to choose for your setting, for your MMO, to try and compete using a brand new setting that not that many people were that familiar with. Very weird. And also they kind of cut the legs out from under D&D Online and from later releases in the 3rd edition line by having 4th edition come out. And to an extent, 4th edition was set to try and compete with massive multiplayer online games. It was very structured like an MMO. They were supposed to have their virtual tabletop that would be coming out, which they're trying again now. So they ended up kind of the problems that they had in 2nd edition kind of reared their heads again, the problems that dogged TSR, in that they ended up kind of competing with themselves and competing with licensed products that they had given out to other people with deeper pockets. So yeah, this was a freelance project, 2008. This is 2 years before the dark times really started. And it was a bit of an odd project right from the start. I was recommended by Dave Alsop for the job, as I recall. And this was I had a couple of other bits and pieces on monster manuals and things around the same time. And it was very disorganized, the way they put us together. But, you know, I was willing to eat a lot of shit for 6 cents a word, which at the time in the role-playing industry was a lot of money. Put it that way. Now, I thought it would only be me and a couple of other people working on it. And while only, I think, 4 of us got credit on the front page, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There were 9 of us supposedly working on the book, and 2 editors and a managing editor. So, too many cooks, I think. And even weirder for me was the fact that I was semi-explicitly hired because I'd actually played the D&D Online MMO. Which, again, weird choice. It was a kind of action MMO. You were practically everything was in instances, and it wasn't as tactical or as open or freeform as tabletop role-playing is. Of course, nothing on a computer can be, really, at least not yet. So yeah, more weird choices. So many weird choices. And I seem to be the only one with any reasonable experience of the setting of the MMO, which was Stormreach, which is this sort of colonial holding on a new continent where people are gradually exploring and finding out more about what lies beyond the city. Most other people didn't really have much in the way of experience with the MMO. I had to write like a sort of briefing for everybody else, which was kind of impossible, really, because a lot of the information was quite opaque and game wikis weren't quite as widespread as they became later on. And I ended up acting kind of like a consultant to the other writers at the same time that I was writing my own stuff for the book, constantly trying to bring up things from the MMO to be inserted within the game book, little Easter eggs, mentions of things, stuff like that, trying to really bring the knowledge and content of the MMO forward into the book, because I figured that it's that crossover audience that you're going for. But this was hampered because basically no one else had played much of the game, if any at all, and certainly not as much as me. And I was not like an obsessive player at the time, so yeah, my knowledge wasn't as complete as perhaps it could have been. And yet I was in the position of being the most knowledgeable person working on the book who had played the game. So that was weird. The other weird thing was, well, we had all those editors and everything. They basically just kind of tossed the work to the pool of writers without much consideration over who would be doing what section or whatever, and just kind of left us to fight over the carcass for whoever could blag the most material to write and thus the most money. So that wasn't particularly conducive to a great working environment, and because I was relatively new and unknown, at least as far as D&D was concerned, I kind of let everybody else take whatever they wanted and picked up the pieces. And my attempts to bring in Easter eggs and to make the book tie in to the MMO as much as possible for that crossover audience, a lot of that was ignored. So my efforts were largely in vain. I've never worked for anyone else who just kind of tossed work to the freelancers like a crippled wildebeest being harassed by hyenas, and just let us fight amongst ourselves for what we could get. It's not a way I would recommend anyone organise any project or do any work whatsoever. Obviously this was like 2 years before everything went to shit. The same year that 4th edition came out. So this never stood a chance. It was late, it was short, it was disorganized. Clearly their attention was primarily on the launch of 4th edition at the time, and that was a freaking disaster. So this is a weird little product. Now I'm proud of having worked on it. And I realise this video has mostly been about what it was like to work for Wizards rather than the project itself. But the project itself just isn't fantastically interesting. If you know Eberron, then you know the kind of thing that's here. It's a kind of explicitly colonialist thing, which I don't think they would do today, even though it's great adventure fodder. It's just so weird. The way they organised it, the way they left us to work on it with very little oversight and a lot of infighting, the way they were almost embarrassed, it seemed, by the links to the MMO, despite wanting that crossover audience and explicitly going after the MMO audience with 4th edition. It's like the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, and we just kind of muddled through, I suppose. I think we still managed to produce something somewhat cohesive at the end, but it is a very confused, very schizophrenic book that lacks that kind of overall vision that might have come from having a lead writer with the authority, respect and position to bring it all together. Spends far too much time talking about what lies beyond the city rather than the city itself for what is ostensibly a city book, and there's just not enough of the MMO within the book, and it was too late. Like I said, this is something you should have planned to come out at the same time as the computer game, and 4th edition with its explicit attempts to ape MMOs, bringing that out so soon after this, which ties back into the MMO, but which is tied to the 3rd edition rules system, there's just a lack of thought. Nothing sinister, I don't think. I think their attention was just elsewhere. But emblematic of, I think, how they've failed to think through 2nd and 3rd order effects of decisions that they make that has gone on to today. And I think they are motivated to fuck up these days, whereas back then I think it was just a lack of attention, lack of focus, a lack of detail-oriented thinking and implications thinking. It's interesting as an artifact of the time. I think if you can still get hold of a copy, you can probably still get the PDF. And if you're still playing 3rd edition, or if you transferred to Pathfinder, there's a few gems in here. You might be able to pick it up cheap on eBay or something. I don't think it's a particularly sought after book, except for completionists. So yeah, there is some stuff that's good in here about running urban campaigns and the details of the city and so on. It's just it's a shame that my experience was so chaotic and so competitive and so uncooperative, and as a result I just don't think it is what it could have been, and it didn't tie in to the MMO enough to really exploit that connection. So yeah, a little glance behind the curtain and a retrospective on some of my much older freelance work. Zang.
There's a magical time on the cusp of true adolescence where you're no longer quite a child and not yet an adult. A time where the confidence of the teenager and the wonder of the child combine in a surge of optimism, hope and imagination to make some of the most important moments of our lives. There's a rich vein of films that tap into this time. These are the films where the kids save the world, find something fantastical, or solve a problem that the adults can't or wouldn't even believe existed. Some of these are fantastical, some are not. Some are a loving homage to the older versions of the same sorts of stories. If you like The Goonies, Super 8, The Monster Squad, or Explorers, this is a game for you and your kids. Available at post-mort.com and drive-through RPG.